Welcome to EPG Pathshala. My name is Ananya Bhattacharjee. This module is from the paper titled Women, Conflict and Militarization. Module 28 is Reasons for Women's Involvement in Terrorism. In this module, we are going to discuss various reasons behind a woman joining any terrorist group. In some cases, we find that both men and women have the same reason for joining a terrorist group, while in some other cases, women are particularly motivated by feminist goals, for example, gender equality. The idea of a woman being a terrorist is not easy to comprehend with regard to the conventional roles that they are expected to play. It is difficult to grapple with the thought that mothers, wives, and daughters can be terrorists. But there can be a number of reasons, like socio-political, economic frustrations, that might lead to their involvement in any terrorist attack. The women terrorists are often seen as irrational and aberrant by the society, who otherwise prefer to see them in conforming roles. Cindy D. Ness states that one extreme view is that terrorist attacks are carried out by women on the fringe of society who pursued their suicide missions as a way to restore their honor and that of their family. And the other extreme sees the female terrorist and militants as a liberated feminist actor embracing violence as a way to achieve respect in the society. However, there are many other reasons for a woman's involvement in terrorism. The first reason is that of revenge. Revenge which arises out of extreme grief over the loss of a near one motivates mothers, wives, sisters, daughters, and lovers to join militant organizations. The death of an important male member in the family brings about a great setback regarding the emotional and financial situation. Most women view such a loss as total injustice meted out to them by the society or the state and take recourse to violent activities. Sometimes, extreme grief-stricken women overcome their grief by joining a terrorist group. C. Gentry explains that motherhood motivates women terrorists, as terrorists are sometimes women who did not or could not have children, or are violent mothers who can be a martyr after giving birth to martyrs, and calls this as quote-unquote twisted maternalism. The second reason is that of shame. Motivation for women to join hands with terrorist organizations can be referred to the cultural concept of womanhood that are integral part of various societies. First, Vanop suggests that many females are driven to terrorism by a desire to regard their personal and family honor. Certain cases where women have lost their virtue through rape or are infertile due to biological reasons, their society may not regard them as a woman at all. Second, Vanop suggests that, I quote, as a result of marginalization, women may seek refuge in a terrorist organization. These groups offer double benefit to these women by accepting them when they are no longer having any option in mainstream society and allowing them to regain by honor by committing a terrorist attack, unquote. Women who have been sexually assaulted often find in terrorism a means to restore their earlier purity. This section of women, who may or may not be married, are ashamed of themselves and feel that they have brought dishonor to the family. These women sometimes become suicide bombers in an attempt to shed what they perceive as their contaminated selves. Terrorist groups provide women who are infertile or are perceived as having a major flaw in their character and are considered useless an opportunity through which they can reinvent themselves in a sexist society that has neglected them. Women act as martyrs and sacrifice their selves so as to redeem themselves and regain honor in their family and the society. The next reason is that of financial hardship. The demise of the bread earner of the family results in extreme financial difficulties. Women get involved in terrorist activities to support the family economically. Often, a mother sacrifices her child and sometimes her life in suicide missions to ensure the well-being of her children and family. After sacrificing her life, the family of a woman terrorist involved in suicide attacks is given a substantial amount of money as compensation by the organization to stabilize the financial condition of her family. Mia Bloom argues, and I quote, "Women across a number of conflicts and in several different terrorist groups tend to be motivated by the 4 R's: revenge for death of a family member, redemption for past sins that have damaged their self-image, relationship with insurgents such as father or husband, and desired respect from their community for their dedication to the cause." Unquote. The next reason that lays behind a woman joining any terrorist group is that of protection. Terrorist groups provide security to the population of places where they are based. This motivates people to provide refuge to the terrorists within their houses and villages. Sometimes, the terrorists take leadership roles and become the head of a locality like a godfather and promises to ensure security and help to the people who are loyal to them. This prompts the people to support the terrorists. At the same time, they are also terrified with the thought of being punished if they do not support them. Women who provide shelter to the terrorist groups later become terrorists themselves due to a number of reasons, be it personal or political. There are many socio-political and religious causes which motivates a woman to join any militant organization. Many women terrorists devote themselves for the upliftment of the underprivileged people of a particular community. Their fight and willingness to sacrifice their lives are motivated by the hope that political attention will be given towards the suffering of their people after their death. Many women terrorists are inspired by the religious belief that by accepting martyrdom, one can help one's religion and country. Women terrorists of Palestine, for example, Wafa al-Bas, was highly motivated to serve her country and religion through the act of martyrdom. Women terrorists are drawn towards terrorism as it also provides a scope for improving their social status. They work within an organization with the belief that they will occupy similar positions as their male counterparts. They are motivated with the hope of creating a new life for themselves and breaking away with the earlier rules and conventions of the society. Individual frustrations and grievances are used as a means by organization to recruit women terrorists and eventually work towards a larger political cause. Now let us look at some of the reasons which inspires a woman suicide bomber to carry out suicidal attacks. Most studies comment that suicide bombers are generally poor people who are deprived of opportunities to improve their living conditions. Most often, women are drawn towards suicide bombings out of frustration which comes due to poverty. However, there are examples of suicide bombers from the LTTE who are educated, middle and upper class people. Their motivation towards suicide bombing is purely political and an effort to bring equality for the Tamil people in Sri Lanka. On the other hand, women who have witnessed violence and bloodshed throughout their lives tend to be less sensitive to terrorist activities and sometimes join militant organizations out of despondency. Let us take the example of the black widows in Chechnya. Most of them are driven by the despair, and it is also their experiences living in a patriarchal society that determines their choice of being a terrorist. After the death of a male member in the family who is also the protector of the house, women feel that their integrity is being lost. They find suicide bombings as an agency to break free from the shackles of the society and also a means of protest against the domination of the government of Russia. Researchers have found that a vast majority of female suicide bombers, I quote, were exploited by the terrorist organizations, by close friends, or even by their own families, and were pushed into carrying out terrorist attacks. Unquote. It appears that women's motives for such attacks are rooted less in ideology than in the histories of physical, mental, and sexual abuse within their own families. Their motives rarely involve free will, but rather blackmail or the hope of redemption for sexual indiscretion through violence and self-sacrifice. One can cite the case of Palestine's first female suicide bomber, Wafa Idris. She blew herself up in downtown Jerusalem in January 2002, killing an 81-year-old Israeli man and injuring 100 bystanders. Idris's husband had divorced her after a miscarriage, leaving her unable to conceive a child, and married another woman with whom he proceeded to father 4 children. Her suicide redeemed her from this perceived disgrace and inspired 9 successful imitators during the Second Intifada. In Berko's view, female suicide bombings has as much to do with a sort of proactive quote-unquote honor killing as they do with classic and stereotypical quote-unquote Islam versus the West terrorism. Terrorists have differing roles within their terrorist group, such as the money launderer, the forger, the organizer of operations, the person who cold-bloodedly shoots, and the suicide bomber. Each of these roles attracts differing psychological profiles. Bombers may be frustrated and alienated individuals who have had their identity shaped in extreme fashion by leaders. They can have certain psychological traits still within normality, classifications which make them more likely to join a terrorist group. Psychological autopsies reconstruct the psyche of bombers and reveal their personality traits different from other terrorists, such as weak personality, social marginalization, rigid thinking, and low self-esteem. In terrorist activities is increasing at a faster rate in the present world. Most studies have found that people participating in the act of terror are not separate from the socio-emotional functioning that other people have. However, there can be a wide range of reasons and motivations behind a woman's involvement in political violence. Here are some of the other possible reasons for an individual's motivation. First is that of gender equality. According to NACOS, I quote, "Contemporary news still explains the motives of female terrorists as an expression of gender equality or the struggle to achieve gender equality quite frequently," unquote. However, many of these women may not find gender equality after joining a terrorist group, and the discrimination still continues at that level. But Vanop lays out the premise of this argument at length. He says, "Terrorist attacks occur in the public realm from which women are otherwise excluded. Female terrorists are thus able to pursue opportunities other than the limited ones available in traditional societies. This suggests that female subordination is linked to female participation in terrorism. As agents of violence, women are no longer defined according to their gendered roles. In this case, participation in terrorism is a means through which women can pursue a misinterpreted understanding of female liberation or emancipation. As a result of the absence of other role models, the radical women do believe gender equality means being as violent as their male counterparts are. The next motivation comes when there is alignment with the group's ideology. Some women join terrorist organizations just because, like men, their beliefs are somewhat similar to the group's ideology and doctrines. According to Christine Sixta, I quote, "Terrorist females want social reform to preserve their own cultures and religion from the invading and increasingly intrusive Western culture. They want to keep their culture intact," unquote. Martin points out that for terrorists, regardless of sex, a major cultural determinant of terrorism is the perception of outsiders and anticipation of their threat to a group or culture's survival, unquote. This identified motivation for female to join terrorist groups prove that all motivation is specific to sex. Experiences related to personal lives can be influential for both men and women to join terrorist organizations. Researchers found that certain influences can be sex-specific while some others are not. Cunningham observes that most women are recruited and involved into terrorism due to the direct influence of men in their families. Fink et al. Argues, I quote, Like some of their male counterparts, women can be influenced or coerced to participate in terrorism by male family members, unquote. First notes that female terrorists are frequently motivated by personal reasons, such as revenge or key life events that affected the woman personally. Many scholars have suggested that something extraordinary must have taken place that has compelled a woman to join any terrorist organization. Another observation is that due to various traumatic events like rape or death of near ones, a woman might choose to finish her life by joining hands with any terrorist group and sacrificing her life. Fink et al. Notes, I quote, "Some of the same factors that prompt men to become terrorists drive women in the same way. Grievance about socio-political condition, grief about the death of a loved one, real or perceived humiliation on a personal, physical, psychological or political level, a fanatical commitment to a religious or ideological belief, an intention to derive economic benefits, or a desire to effect radical changes," unquote. Jack and Taylor note that key events in terrorists' lives, I quote, "may provide possible motivation for suicide terrorism that arise out of an individual's psychological response to events and circumstances that were beyond their control," unquote. They also note that the death of a loved one, humiliation, and exploitation can motivate individuals regardless of sex. Some studies state that women's involvement might relate to the shortage of men in any terrorist group due to various reasons such as getting arrested or being killed. Talking about the South Asian context, there are many issues that throw light into female terrorism. Cunningham states that personal motives influenced women to join LTT and become suicide bombers. Freedom and liberation were key themes at both collective and individual levels. The idea of sacrifice as a general cultural norm and exploitation of female combatant roles by LTT leaders. Tamil nationalism was not sex-specific. LTT women joined for the same reason as that of men, for example, individual determination and land rights. Women sometimes joined the terrorist groups being motivated by aspects such as fear, anger, sexual conflict, scope for a better life, and so on. Let us look at the propaganda of women within the LTTE. Within the LTTE was the specialized Women's Front of the Liberation Tigers, founded in 1983. The 5 main aims of the Women's Front, also known as the Birds of Freedom, were to secure the right to self-determination of the Tamil people and establish an independent democratic state of Tamil Eelam, abolish the oppressive caste discrimination and semi-feudal customs, eliminate all discrimination against Tamil women to secure social, political and economic equality, ensure control over their own lives, and finally to secure legal protection for women against sexual violence. It is evident that in this list of aims, particular female grievances are being looked into. However, there are no indication by the LTTE that women were recruited specifically to contribute to the civil conflict in a gender-specific way. Research by Jack and Taylor studies the backdrop and social experiences of women terrorists compared with their male counterparts, highlighting a few differences. Their study revealed that the majority of female terrorists were equivalent in age and in the role that they played, and they were more likely to have higher levels of education, less likely to be unemployed, or have prior activist connections. Furthermore, their results found that women terrorists were more likely to be widowed or divorced compared to males, indicating that female motivation to commit violent acts relate more heavily to individual rather than collective engagement in terrorism. Other studies suggest that some of the factors that prompts men and women to become terrorists, such as socio-political conditions, death of a family member, fanatical commitment to ideological beliefs, and the desire to effect social change, are also taken into consideration. Let us look at the case of women within ISIS. An example illustrating how problematic our perceptions and portrayals of female ISIS members tend to be is the focus on their role as jihadi brides. This term shows that we see women joining IS as essentially different from men, because we have hardly heard about jihadi grooms. By focusing on marriage and women's roles as wives, we deny their agency and reduce the reasons for which they chose to join IS, to marry and define themselves vis-a-vis through men only. Surely, many women joining IS dream of being married to a fighter. However, accounts of women who have moved to IS-controlled territory show that it is only one motivational factor amongst numerous that is behind the motivation. The other various reasons are such as supporting IS, fighting perceived injustice, and living in an utopian Islamic state. These perceptions of Muslim women are studied in a century-old Western tradition of objectifying Muslim women and eroticizing them and their life experiences. Recent research has shown overall men and women who join IS share the same motivations with only minimal gender-specific differences. Factors which push an individual into joining a terrorist group, IS in this case, includes feelings of isolation in the West, perception that the imagined community of Muslims are being tortured, frustrations over a perceived lack of international action in Syria, Iraq, and other hotspots of the Muslim majority world. Positive incentives which draw an individual towards IS include the desire to help build a supposedly Islamic state, ideals of belonging, identity, and community, as well as romanticization of life under IS. Individual experiences and perceptions may be gendered. For example, Muslim women might feel particularly marginalized because of negative perceptions of women wearing the hijab, which prevails in most European non-Muslim communities. But overall, there are no major differences in the reasons for which men and women join IS. In the conclusion, let us look at what actually happens in the conflict and non-conflict zones. In conflict zones, individuals primarily participate in terrorist activities out of revenge and trauma that arises due to the violence they have endured or witnessed. There are numerous other reasons, but revenge and trauma are primary. However, in non-conflict zones, the motivators are more likely to include discrimination, marginalization, frustrated aspirations, a desire for adventure, and many more. Now, recruiters in non-conflict zones bring into discussion what is actually happening in conflict zones through some video footage or visuals of violence. This can certainly induce a secondary trauma in the life of an individual related to the non-conflict zone and identify with themselves as the fictive kin. In this regard, we can bring in the example of the Muslim Ummah, where downtrodden Palestinians, Chechens, Kashmiris, Afghanis, Iraqis are referred to as one's brothers and sisters. Thank you.